So let's continue with the panel discussion. So we have all the speakers here on the panel. I would say that we heard quite a lot of interesting information that, again, flow one from the other. So this was not like just randomized in a way. So we hear from Rolf what is, let's say, the policy approach, policy objective. Antonio gave a bit of the, I would say, architectural ecosystem level, plus first who introduced, together with Rolf, the community and growing communities to basically be aware and use whatever it's available there. Is it open source or in general? And then we started with the large-scale pilots with a link to the telco edge as a sort of also, I would say, logical, in a way, continuation, upgrade in thinking in the approach. And then we heard, of course, from the open source to, let's say, communities, how this can be not only done, but again, built into the community work, and then also from Lucian, how it can be practically applied. And I think we can structure a bit of a discussion around these themes, starting again first with the Rolf, and then continue in the order how we basically speak, in a sense, to keep a sort of the flow. And then, of course, at the end, we will open for the audience to the questions if you have any of this. So maybe, Rolf, you can start. You have, okay, you have the...
Yeah, I think we had a good discussion this morning about trends, and then I said our main purpose or main ambition is to link what we do funding under research is how to link it to the policies. And research projects are always quite broad, have different scopes, of course research topics, and in light of the geopolitical conflicts at the moment, what you see, the policy arena changes very, very quickly. So questions eventually also from the other panelists, you know, what is your ambition or what is your learnings, you know, how to bridge the innovation space to the policy space.
Thanks. And then I would say also, so we say, let's say we have the policy objectives, policy start, which, as Rolf says, is also changing, of course, much quickly, I would say, than we were used to in the past. So we have to also, I would say, calculate in the work this as well. Then we have the projects, which are research, but also innovation, meaning closer to the market. And maybe, Antonio, you can just continue, maybe also from this ecosystem, and let's say community building, because, of course, if we don't have this, nothing will be used.
I'm going to concentrate on actually the first question, which was on the vulnerabilities, okay? And we have here another community, which is OCC, Open Community for Compliance, okay? So if you look at what we have a number of regulations. I'm going to just focus on the CRA, on example, Cyber Resistance Act, okay? So we need to comply with it. We need to understand how to do it. The community can help, okay? And in particular, so sorry, I'm going to mention about standardization. It's surprising to see that there's no standard on cybersecurity resilience. There's no standard. So there is an opportunity, okay? Secondly, there's no standard on how to put them together, okay? Yeah, you have a few things. We just started standards on guidance for cybersecurity of systems, okay? And here, my objective would be that we take all those examples that we mentioned, like what Lucia mentioned about RTE and things like that, and we put them as use cases, and we show that there are a few needs that are there, and actually we can take, as example, the Cyber Resistance Act and what are the regulation you have, but you can operationalize that with requirements, okay? And this is one of the objectives we have, I think, for the next 3 or 4 years on standardization. I'm representing SC27 vis-a-vis ENISA. They have a group called SCCG, Stakeholder Group, Stakeholder Cybersecurity Certification Group, and I'm representing SC7. I will make a presentation in May about that and ask her to work together on approaches, high level, architecture-based, where we can do it, okay? And we have a few standards. I'm not going to get details, it's too much, but I think there is a pathway so that we create the link also with the work here. So OCC is working on things, tools to help, but then we will have also standards to help, okay? Yeah.
Thank you, Antonio.
Maybe I can come in here. As said, we have the different, we also closely work with our standardization units and the rolling plan for standards for years, no? I think IoT is there, edge computing is there. But as said, what we see, the innovation is developing much faster, and the threats are much faster. So definitely, what was also mentioned this morning is that the open source communities and the developers, they're facing the risks, and they see the standards themselves. It's a community, you see it from different angles, and they're much quicker in identifying risks, the threats, and also, in order to see whether the standards are fit for purpose. So the link between open source projects and standards, I think that should be brought into the project management from the very first beginning, to see what is at stake, what is the landscape, what is the relevance. It's a bit of work for the foundation, the project lead, to train the people, make them aware, and then to include the interfaces and the interoperability and the standards from the very first beginning. And then we could have really a win-win situation where we can feedback the information from the development, from the coding, which is much faster now also because of AI and Gen AI tools, to the standardization work. Otherwise, standardization will be left behind and will be always too late.
I think you made a very good point. I can just tell you that from experience of one other EU-funded project, which is about international collaboration of standards in several areas, including, for example, cloud edge AI, but also cybersecurity, data, and others. What we can see there, and it is like 2 years project, almost close to the end, how we started and when we started and what we see now, because we were making updates of the priorities for each of the areas, it's enormous change. So, and it's very kind of tricky even for the people who are on almost daily basis in it to keep a track on all of it. And then updates on the rolling plan and other things, annual union work program and so on. So it is a complex thing, but I agree with you. I think this is really something that ideally should be built from the beginning, and then also see, by having these links with international partners that we have, with what we call like-minded countries, that we also use them to dialogue with them, which Antonio, for example, does already quite well on many levels, so that they also pick that up. Because if just we do it, it's great, but at the end of the day, you want also to be competitive. You want to help, if it is possible, that this becomes as widely used as possible. But Nacho, let's continue with you from your perspective, based on what you presented and what we now started as discussion points.
Yes, thank you, Damir. Of course, I agree with everything said so far. I will be now in this intervention and later in the next question talking more from the perspective of how open source leverages research funds, not only for the creation and the spontaneous search of potential solutions, but also funneling interests from those companies that adventure and decide to engage in such activities of research, and how this should be funneled later for sustainability and continuity. And why sometimes this very point is what lies behind reluctance of adopting certain open source tools for certain industries. And we have seen this in my trajectory in projects, and also when you discuss when you are deploying your own open source tools, you try to deploy in the industry. Because sometimes, I think this has not been touched upon today, but the fact about further maintenance, support, and skills needed for companies to really embrace these open source tools are sometimes barriers that we should consider when we think of the next way or the next rounds of funding for these projects. It's not the same to acquire an open source tool without the support if it's not followed by a clear business model, like an SME embracing this open source, making it its own, or even if they created it, they can make the support and the maintenance long term. Or if the industry themselves need to be trained or need to hire skilled engineers that would master the usage of these open source tools. So this is one of the barriers I wanted to bring into the table that we see, that may still not be very clear how to solve for the next rounds of funding and embrace of the open source tools. I think that's my views on this very topic, and I will continue with other perspectives later.
Thank you very much. Let's continue with George. So I think you can.
Yeah. So we have been talking a lot about how to basically bring digital transformation in Europe, right? And try to promote all the stakeholders and all the businesses to go from traditional models to modern ones where they adopt technology mostly, right? One question that comes into the game is basically this transformation will lead to cybersecurity risks, and do we have any ways to mitigate those things, right? How can we tackle those aspects? I would say here open source is the key, because if we were to transform those businesses in Europe with proprietary software, which is black box, we don't know it, we don't know what it contains, we will definitely face those cybersecurity risks, and we won't have the means to solve them or address them, right? So by promoting an open, sovereign European stack that will fuel this transformation based on open source in its core, then we have the means to know what we're tackling with, how to address potential security issues, and basically address all the challenges that will come around. The other aspect that comes along this is also that we have seen from the panels also today that there are lots of developments in different areas in open source. Some do a lot about slicing telco ads, some others work on security, AI, data. It is often the case that those do not know about each other. So there's another aspect here which I would also like to promote also in the face of ETSI. Cross-software development community efforts to integrate things together. We are doing something at ETSI these days, and we're about to show it in the upcoming EU CNC. There is a ETSI SDG Lab, they call it. It's a cross-software development community effort. All the ETSI groups come together and they do something integrated, something bigger that brings together things from different perspectives. And I think this is also key for open source to grow, because this amplifies the communities actually.
Okay. I think this is an important point again, to grow the community, because whatever you can have as a solution, if you have no one actually know about this, like you said, or using it, it's not good. And this, I would say, cross-sectoral. I think in your slides you made a very good point on horizontality, verticality, for example, of AI and cybersecurity. And this, I think, is also elements that we should not forget, and Antonio also talked about this. So again, this didn't just, let's say, fall from the sky, but this is first, one of the concerns that people have. Second, it is something that is real, because we heard a lot about cyber threats and attacks and so on. And then the third thing is, again, how to get the community to use, to recognize this, and basically to grow the solutions for it, right? Let's continue with Giovanni and seeing also some reflections from the, let's say, more telco cloud age perspective.
Yeah, thank you. Well, most of what we have said applies similarly also to the telco and edge convergence, because the softwareization, this adoption of open source, the tension between large corporate, let's say, organized activities and more spontaneous or highly distributed community-based efforts, this is not an exclusive situation of the telco. I think that a specific point of the telco cloud convergence is this current asymmetry between the relative strength of telecommunication providers and cloud providers in Europe. So, you know, when two companies merge, it is a merger or an acquisition depending on the relative strength of these two companies. So here the effort, the Euro 3C project in particular, has the challenge of trying to get a balanced outcome starting from two very unbalanced industries. And it's like a prisoner dilemma kind of thing. No? The telcos are stronger, but it would be also in the interest of telco industry if the combined telco cloud raises the cloud providers in Europe, and so the overall offer improves. And this is one challenge that we have, because let's not forget that Euro 3C, even if it looks a big project, is not of the scale that you would need to do a full European infrastructure upgrade, and this is not the topic of the project. The project has to make a convincing pilot that shows that you can do federated and integrated connectivity and computing to a level that could satisfy the Europe needs. And then down the line will come, as yet unknown, at least to me, larger funding, probably public-private initiatives to actually do the transition or complete the transition. So this at the moment is this, for the telco cloud-specific bit, I think this is the pivotal situation of the Euro 3C project, okay? Yeah, then I have other consideration more on strategic aspect, and then we can maybe talk later.
Thank you very much. And now go back to the, let's say, more direct open source perspective, first from Manrique, and then we will pass to Lucian.
Well, I mean, regarding the conversation this morning and the things we were showing and talking about during these days preparing the topic, one of the things I like to highlight is the importance of governance models that allow to build technology in a way that allows participants and contributors to those projects to build business models that are, first of all, sustainable for those companies, but also ensure that the projects they are building and the technologies they are building in the open source are also sustainable by themselves. Because sometimes it's okay, we have some funding, we develop something, it's done, we have a nice governance, it's there in a Git repository, but then how I can build something that I can continue working on this because there are new calls, because there are new opportunities, but also because I have used that on my business in a way that is giving some business advantage to keep evolving me. So I will keep working on this because it's fundamental for me.
Thank you. So in a way to also connect to what Giovanni was mentioning, previous speakers is Nacho as well. So there is, I would say, sort of the open question about the use, reuse, building upon on this. I mean, it's a rightful question for the Commission and also for, let's say, citizens who are funding all of this ultimately, like, okay, you have a research, you do this, you have it, like you said, in a nice repository, and so what, right? Yeah. And then, of course, if you have another project and other things, how this is used, how this is reused, how this can be built upon, and how business models can be actually developed out of it. And, of course, taking into account what George mentioned, risks. There are always some risks. Yeah. But like you also said in your presentation before the lunch, Manrique, I mean, there are risks that may exist, but they are unlikely to materialize, or let's say their probability is reasonably low, and then you should more talk about benefits, not forgetting about the risks, but you are not focusing then on the risk, you focus on the benefits, right? Maybe, Lucian, you can also, as the one who is, I would say, contributing to the let's say, open source development, but also open source use, which is a very important element. You can maybe also reflect on that.
Yeah, exactly. And I would like to follow up on these aspects because I think one of the best choices we made when we started our journey was to partner with the foundation. I already mentioned during my presentation that the foundation brought us the trust framework, both from the technical and governance point of view, that was needed to set the proper condition for the growth of the community. Actually, if we want to improve technological resilience or sovereignty, however we call it in Europe, my message today would be that our ecosystem should take leadership roles, both on the technical level and on the strategic level in the, let's say, the most promising open source technologies that are hosted at foundations. There is and it's especially relevant in Europe because our framework in Europe does not facilitate the there is a bit of so our context in Europe does not facilitate consolidation. Actually, we have countries that are not always aligned in the strategy, that have sometimes some national priorities. We have competition laws that favor competition and not always consolidation. And the point is, how can we how can we make sure that various investments from various parts of the community can aggregate to build something that can be competitive and sustainable. And on this point, also an important aspect is we also have to be careful when considering sovereignty, not reinventing too much the wheel, because the money we put into reinventing the wheel is the money that we don't put into innovation. So the risk is to be lagging behind, because on the other parts of the world, people will put the same money into new innovations. And maybe the third point that is important to me, so LF Energy is an initiative driven by the technology end users. It was initiated by grid operators, and it's more or less driven by grid operators. But the purpose is not to say that the model will be internalizing all the capabilities at the technology end user. We need also to leverage a vendor ecosystem. And this is also what will be the most efficient solution for the innovation in the long run, etc. And to achieve that, what we decided to do, and actually it was inspired by our vendor ecosystem, was to adapt our procurement practices to be able to impose open source clauses. I already mentioned it briefly, but this allows us to say, okay, for this need, I want you to be based on this kind of specific technologies, on our case, host it at the Linux Foundation energy, and you should contribute back what we are paying into contribute it upstream so that it can consolidate in the long run, etc. And this is not an easy task, because usually either when you go to open source, either it comes from technical savvy teams that know how open source works, and they just say, okay, but I can do it myself. And or then the project is handled at another level, less technical level, and then people don't know what open source is about, and they just say, I just procure something, it's a black box, I don't care because I don't know how to do otherwise. And we need to create this path in the middle where we educate, and not only technical people, but also business people, executive level institutions, on how to operate when they manage a procurement contract, how they handle open source procurement. Actually.
Thank you very much. I think you raised quite a lot of issues. In any case, you were next. Just to say that I think it's very important, this aspect, when you say, the balance between like what is the sovereignty and what actually we are investing in. I think that one of the issues is that if you ask 3 persons in Europe what is the sovereignty, you will have 5 answers. And I would say that none of it is either good or bad. Most probably in all of them there is, a grain of truth. The thing is, like you said, we need to find the things that we can really agree and then invest into that and get the benefit for the broadest community and the single market. And this is what I think that ultimately is also something that we should never forget, that all of these things should ultimately work within the single market. This is not like I do something, it works in 2 or 3 big countries, and that's it, right? So it should be a bit broader perspective there. But Rolf, please.
Yeah, I want to pick up. And so why now open source? How many of you are or were in European projects? In any of the projects, in European research projects, as a partner or contributing? No, from your side, yes. So I think we had open source in many projects, and the norm was open source we put on GitHub, full stop. So now then we stop, the project stopped. So why now there's a change? Why do we talk about open source? Yes, on one hand we have the geopolitical conflicts. So with the Eurostack, it was brought to the parliament, it was brought to the politicians. So we have that high political visibility on sovereignty, that we cannot rely on components and AI-driven components, software-driven components from outside. So we need to have our own software stack. But then, also you heard from Lucian on energy and others, if we know STV, why the companies are moving now. Not because politicians told them, because there's a change in the paradigm. In the automotive, the manufacturer of a car in the past relied on the support of the vendors. It was a vendor-driven ecosystem. So they made the integration and the manufacturer put the branding and made the user interface. Fine, that's changing. So the manufacturer of a car is now, the one who is responsible and does much more agile system integration. And we have seen that in energy as well. The energy operator is not just delivering electrons. So the energy operator of today has to become a system operator to integrate systems, which also include the demand side. So meaning, close to the consumer, which is a distribution grid, or on the demand side, the heat pumps or the charging stations or a depot of charging stations or a data center. So here, you see this complete different paradigm in the system on the roles, which needs a different approach, a much more agile approach, and much more integration of the ecosystem. And there, there's complexity on the one hand, and the different roles encourage people, to move faster and to go into collaborations. And I think there we have a good time or window of opportunity now to sail on the wave and to have the right wind. And we have seen that topic of the waves yesterday from the presentation of SAP. They did a project which had a good resonance in the Olympic Games about the navigation in the regatta. They had an open source, but then finally, for the governance, they relied on established governance schemes on Eclipse or on Linux in order then, to have a proper management of the ecosystem, but without the ecosystem and the community contributors, your open source project is stalled.
Yes, thank you. And, thinking on what was said, I like what you said about this definition of sovereignty, right? Of different ways. It's like when we knew what competitiveness was, but until, Draghi defined this in the report and create the framework of the things that should be done to promote this, it was not yet clear. Maybe we are waiting, impatiently for the sovereign package, Rolf, to be out. And we are eager and anxious to know exactly what this and how this sovereignty features or traits will be portrayed there, so that we will be able to promote them. And here I believe that the role of open source for that sovereignty is key for doing things right. Why I'm saying that? Because, as also Rolf said, digitalization and technology advances pretty quickly, and policy should also adapt. And I think open source and what it implies could help us, companies, but also researchers and developers, not to fall into a temptation or being too fast on adopting certain technologies, especially those coming from foreign. Maybe you have heard about OpenClaw or some of the features of cloud or even Codex. These new technologies that emerge, they come with security concerns. They come with hidden traits that we do not see. So we should put into the value what open source brings to avoid this temptation. And I will be very concise here instead of abstract. We recently have made a result of a research project, IROS, as an open source tool that we want it to be embraced and adopted in the cloud edge IoT. There, by creating it and incubated under Eclipse and now an official product, we have needed to go through very thorough IP check, cascading comproval that there are no leaks in the code, that there are respecting the cascading licenses, among many other aspects that sometimes are neglected when you run too fast and don't go through these processes. Therefore, not stopping at a code in a repo, but going through these processes allows you to be more sovereign, or at least how we understand this sovereignty. And this is the role that, from where I'm talking from, the research and academia should be bidding for and should be putting more effort. The role of creating that code, going through the process, make it more visible, and also take advantage of that to foster its permeate, for it to permeate from all the ranges and tiers of society, I would say, starting from students from our side early innovators, entrepreneurs, up to the way of the industry. This is what I want to say in this regard. Thanks.
I like to leverage what you just said, what Rolf said about the fact that the world is changing. We have disruptive technology, disruptive markets, SDV, things like that. So open source provides this agility. So everything is about agility, okay? And so now we have to help this happen, taking into account sovereignty, which is actually managed by suitable governance. Governance is very important. And also, so as you remember, in this, basically the hourglass model is changing because of disruption. And you have the business, demand side, supply side, and supply side capabilities, standards, and open source, okay? And when it comes to governance, is the whole thing, okay? So we need the demand side to help govern the thing and to make sure that we're linked, okay? So currently there is an issue, which is the governance of standards versus the governance of open source. So we need to solve it, and this is nearly organizational, administrative, sometimes political, but I hope things will get improved so that at the end of the day, the standards get much more agile. So it's all about agility, okay? So open source agility, standards agility, business agility to create disruption, okay? And then sovereignty to make sure that we do it properly, yeah.
I think this is important, you know, how to also manage it, because it's okay to have agility, to have disruption and so on, but ultimately you need to manage it. It cannot be like,
that's why governance.
You know, the outcome is a chaos. It's not the point.
Yeah,
the point
that's
is,
why you need the governance.
Exactly, to get it to the point. Giovanni, please.
I would like to exactly catch on what you said, because it's all about agility, but it also has to be about resilience, which is one way to manage it. And of course, I mean, I closed my presentation with a nod to complex systems. And for me, it's important that it's clear that in the modern situation, a plan is not a sequence of steps that you agree and then you execute without checking. You have to do these plans that you check every time and you replan. You have to do multiple plans in parallel, even contradictory plans to hedge your bets. So there are all these kind of techniques. And this is, for me, one major strategic advantage of open source. There is this natural resilience, because, you know, even the best proprietary software, we have seen it happen, then the European company gets bought. Rightly so, because why couldn't it be bought? So also the idea, no, this company is too important, so the government has to prevent. Yeah, fine, but you see that it's kind of a patch. So if we believe in the free market, at least at the company ownership level, we have to imagine that some European successful company becomes multinational or gets acquired by another non-European entity. So the decoupling of the company author from the source code that open source allows is a feature. And also, one last thing that I want to say here is that we also have to be resilient into our own with respect to our own definition of open source. Because, for example, in last FOSDEM, there was in the policy dev room, there was a tutorial done by the Free Software Foundation. And the representative said there are the 4 freedoms and so on, but he also said that the most important things are the values that we try to protect with these 4 freedoms. And we are exactly in this situation, because I suppose some of you are aware that the values of open source must still be good, but the trick of Stallman to use the copyright law to bootstrap all these things is kind of, you know, suffering now, because between generation of code, execution of binary environments in cloud providers without recognizing the open source contributor. So there are a lot of things that make open source management by letter more difficult. But they don't make open source management by spirit more difficult, because the values of open source are still there and the people who believe in them and work are still there. So we have to also, when we look at ourselves as open source supporters, contributors, managers, stewards, we also have to look at ourselves a little bit and be ready to change a bit. Because I think that all these new requirements that are piled up on the digital society, and open source in particular, require a little bit of rethinking. And we have to admit that we don't know the next best way forward, so we have probably to go on 2 or 3 at the same time.
Thank you, Giovanni. I think it's interesting. And of course, agility is agility in movement, agility in results. But in order to have it, you have to start with your own agility, because if you don't have it, then you will never catch it up.
If I may.
First, and then George, please.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Now, regarding the governance, it's important, and I like your point about demand, how to govern the whole thing. From my, let's say, my open source hat here and my position here is basically, one thing that's important to understand is open source is not a business model. I mean, there are business models that could be using the definition, because there is already a good definition of open source, very well discussed, and it's open to discuss whatever we want by the open source initiative. But there's, to take advantage, okay, how open source is being defined, we can use that to build different kind of businesses. What I think is the threat that we are facing nowadays, and these talks on Force that I think revealed, was not the open source definition by itself. It's the software business definition by itself. I think software, how it's being sold, things like that, is changing, and it's changing so agile that we need to adapt to that. But how the importance of having good governance on the open source projects, and have a community. And one of the first talks I remember was this idea, okay, I get this specification, I run an AI system, and I have the same project with the same features that I need in a different license with a different thing, and I can do it by myself. That's easy. Okay, good, go for it, maintain it, and get a community for it. Otherwise, in the long term, how sustainable it is. I mean, when I'm thinking about the governance model we have built in Eclipse, and you think, okay, we are still people, when we are talking about Eclipse, people think, oh, you are doing the IDE. I don't know how many of you, when you are talking, or, oh, we are going to an Eclipse 7. Oh, they are gonna talk about the IDE. Yes, of course. You can say, okay, no, we are doing many more things. But you think on the other side, okay, the IDE is still there. Decades later, it's still there. It's been developed. It's been used, and it's a, we'll say, sustainable business with many companies on that. And of course, the Eclipse Foundation is still there. So there are some kind of business that you can also develop on that. And I think this is something that we need to train, and it's happening already with the companies in the research projects, that one of the activities, okay, let's train them, okay, but this is open source, how we can do business if we are doing open source? No problem, we are here to help. And this is one of the key points for having a foundation, that is not only about hosting the project and having some IP tools and stuff like that, but also train the community, the developers. And for me, one of the challenging things, and again, this is a personal experience, that after more than 25 years on open source and going in a corporation, seeing new graduates coming from computer science and, oh, I'm using this because it's open. But do you know what open source means? Well, it's in GitHub and it says it's open. Oh, come on, in 25 years, we are still need to explain to people what does the 4 principles mean, the 11 topics that the open source initiative has defined, what's all of that. So there's still work to do, and more than happy to help on that.
These are also important points, but again, we have this underlying thing, it's like community, and then community of, I would say, both developers and users, right? And Lucian, we will come back a bit later to you as well, because you're kind of covering a bit of both. In a way. But first, George, you wanted to intervene.
Yeah. Very good hint by Manrique about sustainability. Just my 2 cents on that. We typically talk a lot about open source. It's not just banging on the keyboard and writing code, right? Yeah. I think the good examples are already given to us about sustainable open source projects, like, for example, the Linux kernel. It has been there for decades, right? Mm-hmm. What is the key? It's not just writing the code. It's building the right abstractions, and building the abstractions in a way that no matter what is the underlying technology, today we may have, I don't know, Kubernetes, tomorrow something else will pop up. These things need to be replaceable. If you have the right abstraction, you can, let's say, patch any kind of technology, no matter in which decade you are in, basically, and yet provide the same added value, right? So I think a key thing about open source communities is really designing and building the right abstractions if they want to be long-living.
And I think this is one of the best, most probably, one of the best contributions to sovereignty, because like you said, if you can patch it, you can change it, you can use it, that means you have that level of control for what you use, that you can use it, you can change it, you can apply it, and you can secure it, right?
Right.
And this is, I think, quite important. But Lucian, let's finish for this round with you, and then we'll have a last minute interventions.
Yeah, do we have time, or do we need to ask? Okay. So, indeed, I could elaborate on several points, actually. Maybe there is one point I wanted to mention. So, indeed, when we are talking about sovereignty, there can be various dimensions. There are legal and geopolitical aspects. There are supply chain consideration. There could be operational consideration, like how can we make sure that software is supported, available, etc. But one important thing, to my point of view, is also like how we set the condition that the software can indeed evolve to help the ecosystem to innovate, to get new solutions, efficient solutions for its business, to fulfill its future needs, and to create this innovation dynamics that will also reinforce the underlying business model in the long run. And I think that's a point where, and actually it makes me think that the success of open source today is a result of the success of underlying business models. That's why open source has been boosted by several companies that realize that they can get a lot of benefits from this model. And we have to understand how the future software business model will evolve. Indeed, there are some revolutions around AI. We mentioned the fact that end users are taking a grip also on the control of their software. So the business model is changing. And I think it could be worth also from a research point of view to understand and investigate how these changes are happening, because in the end, these business model changes will affect the proper open source governance model that would be successful. And this is a point, additional point I wanted to make.
Thank you very much. Now we have about 3.5 minutes for the final thoughts. Maybe start with Rolf and then just keep the same, let's say, line as we had.
Yeah, as I mentioned quite often, Commission prepares a sovereign package, and guess what is in the package? I think there will be no surprise. I think definitely, looking at the different discussions, we definitely will reinforce the role of the foundations. It's clear, that as mentioned by Thibaut yesterday, we spend a lot of effort in order these sort of cloud-to-cloud middleware on simple. Finally, it's open source, but it's not the end of the journey. At the end of the day, if public administration want to use it or private, you need a governance model behind it. So it's quite obvious. So inside the package will be to strengthen the role of the foundations. I think definitely there will be actions related to encourage governments in order to move towards open source corporate framework for the offices, for the business intelligence, for governance, for digital governance, and finally we reinforce the role of what was discussed today, a whole industrial software stack, because in order to manage the ecosystem, in order to manage security risk across the different stack, you need sort of a reference architecture. If you have something which is tangible, like implemented in open source, you have a reference point where the different companies and ecosystem supply chains can work together. So that will be the third element in the package. So not much of a surprise, and we definitely benefit from the awareness of sovereignty by the Euro stack and the parliament, politicians, and the global risks. So from that point of view, it will arrive at the right time. But still, there is room then afterwards, we still have to implement. So then we have to go back to the same circle what we had today.
Yes. Thank you very much, Antonio, please. please.
So I need to say reference architecture rings a bell, and it's open reference architecture. We are doing ISO, and this is going to be, to me, the initial condition. But I wanted to say why I like open source, because it fosters engineering. So it's not only developing software, it's to engineer products, okay? And today, engineering is actually merged with operation, because we do it continuously. So it's just not design and then operate, it's design, operate at the same time, okay? And so we need this. And the last thing I want to say is we have OCC because we need to verify. So if we don't have those conditions, nothing happens. So that's why I like OCC, I have to say, because it's going to be the last conditions for me to make sure I go to the market.
Thank you, Antonio. Giovanni, please.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, maybe I can spend a couple of words on the research aspect. Okay, open source is obviously strategic enabler on many aspects. I think that with more awareness on the research side on how to make your research results as immature as they are, as far as from the market as they are, how to make them available for someone to pick them up and carry them on. This is a very important enabling factor of the open source that was Nacho explained, for example, for the IROS project. The other aspect is, I think it is, open source is key on all those wastes of the hourglasses that Antonio was talking about, because the waste is where you are forced to comply. And if what you have to comply with is not open, you don't have access, it can be grabbed by a player, then you don't want to cooperate. So that's another aspect. Open source is the natural paradigm for the wastes of all the hourglasses that we define in our, let's say, business model or in our analysis of a segment.
Thank you very much. Nacho, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Just to conclude, a couple of words from my side. We have heard about resilience, right? About agility that open source should comply with. Also the value of abstraction. And I would like to round it up with my experience and what I presented about setting success stories and examples that are embraced by real companies afterwards, and the role that open source have for that, to emanating from research, ensuring that it will have continuity, sustainability after the end of specific wave of funds, so that we can find avenues, and that's the role that we have as research academia, and we also need you all guys from standards and from the industry to make it happen. So that's the commitment, and I would continue the flow from Antonio: design, operate, check with the industry, and maintain. And we need the resources for that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, to conclude, maybe a short call to action. So open source is a great opportunity, and I have a call to action maybe to my peers at the energy industry. We are not an IT company, actually, but what we learned through open source is that there is a fast onboarding, we learn fast, and we benefit from all the lessons learned by other industries. So we need to start soon, small, learn fast, and have a great vision. That's our experience. And in the future, I think my call to action is for our peers to take leadership role in the open source ecosystem, to participate as maintainers, to participate as strategic partners into foundation, etc. That's where we will gain a grip on our technological dependencies.
Thank you, Manrique.
Well, just quick conclusion. I recommend anyone to go for Eclipse Foundation governance model. Read it, it's open, you can contribute to it. And if we want digital sovereignty or digital autonomy in Europe, we need industrial Europe to be contributing to open source. No matter where it's based, that open source, because the same way there is no open source business model, I mean, it's not a business model, there is no flag for open source. So we need the industry to be contributing, to be the one leading. And that was said for one big company a long time ago, not from Europe, that they told me, basically, we are not contributing to an open source project that the governance don't allow us to be one of the key contributors. Because if anything happened to that project, we need to be sure that we are the ones knowing how it works, knowing how to contribute and how to maintain it. It's not because we are just using it and selling something on top of that. We depend on that. So we need care of our value chain. The same thing, steel industry cares about the steel, carbon and everything. So the same thing for software.
Thank you very much. And George, now you are
Yeah.
last but not the least.
Yeah, I will also conclude my thoughts basically around what's next, or what I would expect to be, next steps in this. Well, I would love to see, as I said previously, our community is growing and establishing synergies all together. As Manrique said, it's essential for the big players to get into and drive those communities. Otherwise, there's no immediate way of them reaching the markets. So we need the big players of Europe in-house in these communities, leading and inspiring also the communities. And possibly, from the EU side, considering an alternative approach of funding, possibly, I don't know, like throwing money dedicated to those communities and establishing software projects, possibly, that will allow them to grow faster. Because we have seen cases that there is growth in those communities, but it's not fast enough, right? And the way to grow through R&D projects is not always the fastest path, right? So that's another angle that we may consider in the future.
So thank you very much. We are a bit above time, but not I would say, that much that we still don't have time for any questions from the audience. But before that, I would like you to give a round of applause for our speakers, panelists, for their presentations. And thank you all for your patience with us. Is there any question from the audience? Hi.
I have a question. Tom Fleischmann, Accenture, open source evangelist from the automotive area. So in order to create open source that is viable to the industry, we've seen that in automotive as well, certain really important software assets are defined by standards hidden behind ISO or automotive consortia like AUTOSAR. What is your take, or who from you can potentially answer best? I think we discussed it yesterday briefly. We need certain ISO standards out there to be implemented in open source. Otherwise, the solutions are not viable, I guess. And this puts standardization bodies into pressure there is a certain amount of license going away. But if we can't implement these standards in open source, it's in vain. Because then, so anyone feeling?
So maybe I can mention one thing is we have the notion of smart standards. And my dream is that there is an open source implementation of smart standards so that actually you can access standards according to business models that they have to decide. But still, you can have an open source solutions that manage properly the standards. I'm not sure it answers your question, but then you have categories of standards that you have to be made easily available. Okay, that's important. And some of them includes recommendations for verification with which you can associate code, okay? So for instance, some testing, some trust aspects, you can say, okay, use this tool and it verifies this aspect, okay? And so yes, I would really recommend a big relationship between open source and standards, okay? I'm not sure it answers, but it is the right direction to do that direction, okay?
Exactly.
Well, I think you basically said it all, just here, I think exactly that. And what we did with Aereos was to basically go alongside the development of the right now preliminary working item of ISO SC41 IoT digital twin, because we do believe, and I think that's a take that we should all have from research projects, to starting even 2-3 years, or just starting the projects, selecting which standard you're going to support. For the moment you end up, there is already an open source solution that would cover this future standard to be. And this is at least what we tried to do with Aereos from our side. So yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions or comments?
Joe.
Maybe. No, I don't know if there are others. No?
Oh, Stefan.
I already did. Go to them.
Maybe to solve the continuous chicken and egg problem, apart from industry doing open source, why don't we do industrial open source policy and actually say to the governments like, hey, on the educational level, on university level, on hands-on trainings, we make part of open source. Our research institutes that we work with industry, open source is part, and actually make it a part of actually how industry works, basically gets their workforce in the advance. So, like, why don't push you that? Well, like, who can answer? But like, why are you push? Like, it's nice that industry plays in products, but basically, management doesn't understand open source. The people that we get from students, we have to re-explain open source. Why not change the freaking system end to end?
So the question is quite clear. So why we don't cooperate all together with some policy and with some regulation and not only industry, not only foundation, not only academia.
Yeah,
Who wants to address that?
I think it's definitely a relevant question, and I think we also discussed a bit on lunchtime. You need this sort of awareness and push from the top on the one hand, but as said also in my slide, it's a way, in order to train skills and train your people on collaboration. And this value is for industry, and even in my management, it's not fully understand. I think some people think about, if you open source, everybody can access it, then we will be invaded by China and others. So where you keep our ownership, and this is sort of a change in the mindset we still have to work on. And I hope, with sort of a high-level policy document like the sovereign package, that this mindset is further changing and also goes into the collaborative projects. Whether it goes from top down, that we make it mandatory, I'm not sure that we do it in the next years, but maybe we go along that path.
Probably it will be both, a bit of top down and...
But yeah, Thibaut mentioned yesterday, open money, open source. He said that at the end of his talk. Okay, so he wants to go that direction.
Maybe one addition on top of that. Our experience is also where we see a gap is in, for instance, executive programs. So it's not only about teaching open source to tech people, but also like in companies, the middle management and the top management will have to understand how they can operate with open source. Exactly. And so far, this is really not taught into those programs. So maybe this is something that could be elaborated on.
Maybe the foundations can help.
Yeah.
Oh, I already have one.
Who?
The foundations.
Who?
ECL or whatever.
No, but that, yeah, there's one question.
I may have missed something, nevertheless. I fully agree with the idea of sovereignty, but I think that it should be more than that. What is the competitive advantage for Europe? And if is there any, and how?
I think it was mentioned also by Eric Schmidt, former CTO of Google, said, well, maybe, the AI is led by transatlantic countries, but Europe has a chance if it brings the stakes together, and that's a way, to collaborate with open source for skills and learning, but also put the stakes together and have a collaborative effort to make them stronger. So, and he also said that it's in the industrial space where collaboration on AI and open source should take place.
But can I say that sovereignty is citizen trust? So it's a competitive advantage to have citizen trust. Okay.
Hopefully.
I think sovereignty is a defensive play, is a safety play. We want to make sure that if something that happens, we have ways around it. Whereas competitive advantage is a system liveness property, is the opposite, is that we want to make sure that there is always a way for us to reach a better situation, so to increase our market share or revenue, something like that. So the two things are a little bit, let's say, separated from this point of view. That open source can help with both, because it gives you guarantees, as you were saying, Damir, that it's the other half of the bottom-up, but also is helping because it makes it easier for industries to engage in competition that they are not used to, but then they partner with a foundation. The foundation can tell them how it is done. So it works with both, but the two things for me are very separate. So it can also, you can be very non-sovereign but competitive. So.
Thank you very much. I think with this we can close. Thank you all for listening. Thanks to our speakers for their great interventions, also to the questions from the audience, and I think it was very useful, and I think we will take quite a lot of things with us and to keep working on it in our daily lives. Thank you all.
Thank you as well for the moderation, Damir.
Yeah, thank you, Damir.